business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to the latest episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me is the diva of positioning, Lorraine Kessler. I think we have another great topic planned. We're going to start the first of quite a few episodes on the ways to differentiate, and no worries, we'll intermingle with some other topics, but the ways to differentiate is there's quite a few ways, and each one deserves a discussion unto itself. But we're going to start broadly today, and that way we can give a little bit of background for our listeners to understand why we have a list, which is called Ways to Differentiate, and how that impacts the work that we do for clients and how our clients can think through. So I'm going to give you the first of about 5 questions, Lorraine.
Oh, geez.
And the first, and they're not hard.
Mm-hmm.
They'll roll right off your tongue. So here's the first. How many ways in the total universe can we differentiate a brand? Whether it be a product, service, company, or individual, that's how we define a brand. So let me ask again. How many ways in the total universe can we differentiate a brand?
Well, there aren't infinite ways to differentiate. We've codified through our practice and looking at the works of Jack Trout, positioning and differentiate or die. We've enumerated or codified, I think, around 11 ways, primary ways to differentiate. But within each, there's iteration. So whether it's creating a new category, whether it's leadership, whether it's heritage, which can have different dimensions, whether it's family heritage, long history, cultural, like the country of origin, French wines, Russian vodka. There are iterations within those 11 different ways of differentiating that we've codified. Then there's some creative ways to differentiate on that position once you have a strategic idea, particularly useful if you have a commodity product, such as creating a character or personification flow for progressive, things like that. Tim Williams, who we've heard, Mark, we went to a seminar and he wrote a book called Positioning for Professionals. He said there's really only 2 ways to differentiate, and that is you're either low cost or you're adding value. You're differentiating so that you can charge a higher price and get a higher margin for your products, and that's adding value. But within those ways of adding value, aside from lower cost, we've got about 10 primary ways, 11 being low cost. And those are the ones that we work with.
Even though we've determined there aren't an infinite number of ways to differentiate, there's still a lot of different ways. I bet we've probably applied, I don't know, what would you say, 50 to 100 different types of positions for our clients over the years. And even within the ones that are the same, there's always a nuance to it. So second question, let's assume there's a big number, okay? If that's the case, why do you think companies run toward the sea of sameness instead of finding a way to differentiate themselves? What makes differentiation so hard?
Well, I think there's 2 related things. One is that so many of our clients or people we talk to in business, marketers say, well, our business is we have a commodity product. We're in a commoditization market. And once you start that thinking, then you're really sunk because there are no commodity markets. There are no commodity products. So you need to have a spark of strategic insight and creativity to see that there's always an ability to create kind of a new thought within whatever that market is. The second is that social observers and scientists will tell you is that the urge to copy is so innately human in us that it's so exceptionally strong in the human species that and in some respects, it's because we rely on it, copying to learn and survive. I mean, that's how children learn, right? So this urge is what causes us to closely examine what competitors are doing and to make sure we're offering the same or better features and adapt best practices. There's nothing wrong with those things, adopting best practices. It's just that those things further commoditize you and lead to undifferentiated brands. If that's all you did, you're just doing table stakes. And so what happens is you commoditize your product or service, but you actually commoditize a whole marketplace. Now let's take a market that's has always been called commoditized, water.
Hmm.
All of a sudden we have bottled water, we have Perrier, coffee, that and 5 cents or a nickel will get you, a cup of coffee, whatever that old expression was. So then comes Starbucks and they create a coffee experience that's wildly differentiated, inspired by two things, Italian coffee and actually a restaurateur from the early days in America in Philadelphia, New York, called Horn and Hardart, who had an experience that brought people together to share coffee and very good food and have conversations in the morning and in the afternoon and at lunchtime while they worked in those big cities at a time when people lived in the cities they worked in. So, so successful branding really means going against this urge to copy, and it's not easy to do.
Hmm.
It's hard to do, and that's why I think clients fall into the trap of um, becoming kind of stymied creatively, and they convince themselves we're in a commodity market, we have a commodity product, and there's no way to differentiate.
Well, that I think leads to the third question then.
Hmm.
Why did we narrow our list to only about a dozen ways to differentiate? You mentioned the clients. How does that help them?
Well, there's 12, how do I say this? There's 11 or so primary ways, but as I said, there's iterations within each. And it's merely as a way of kind of as we talked in another podcast, the last one, I believe, we talked about how the brain operates with ladders and categories. So you can think about these ways to differentiate that we've codified as the broad general categories of 11. But there's many ways within them to extend that differentiation in terms of what it means. For example, any brand that reaches beyond just a good and service that delivers a benefit then begins to go into an experience. And so
Hmm.
how that's delivered, how particular to who the audience is, the product, what the product and service is, whether it's a consumer product, whether it's a business to business. It takes on a unique character for every single client that we would engage or anybody would engage. It's got to be somewhat unique, a unique
Hmm.
formula for every client.
If someone were to say, well, where'd you get this list and why these 12? What what do you think, you would tell them in that case?
Well, I believe this list right here that we created that we use in our AD came from the book Differentiate or Die. I think it was within the case studies within that book that Jack Trout
Hmm.
wrote, I think with Al Reese. There's enumeration of these various strategies. And then they're overlaid with ways to differentiate a commodity, which go on top of these, like identifying with a symbol, personifying with a character, um, repositioning the whole category, like lead-free gas, that's repositioning category. So
Hmm.
there's again enumerations under some of the main categories, but that's where they came from.
Good. So we use this list very
Mm-hmm.
religiously. I don't think we've
Mm-hmm.
not ever had it in the hundreds of appreciative discoveries we've done. So explain to our listeners how we use this list in the appreciative discovery and what's so important about the tool. What does it do for the process? Kind of summarize that for our listeners and why it matters so much to us.
Right. Well, first of all, it becomes a deductive tool. So it makes it very easy to engage client participants after intense discussion around the four filters that we've established, the the four C's, as we call them, of the customer, who is the specific customer, what do they care a lot about, the company, what do you care a lot about beyond making money, what are you passionate about, what you will and won't commit to, the competition, where are they in the mind, and what space can we own uniquely and maximize differentiation, and the context, what's going on in the greater market that might be influencing trends and things like that. So once we go through that four filters discussion, we get to a point where some things start to bubble up in terms of possibilities for positioning. And this list helps the clients, literally as a checklist, if you will, to go through and say, oh, are we the leader? Well, no, we're not. We're kind of a small player. Okay, so that's out. It's deductive. Can we own an attribute? Do we do something? Do we deliver some value that a particular customer really a customer segment values over another, whether it's being faster or sexier or harder working, maybe very different customer segments. So, who do we really appeal to? So it can be that. And so it gives them a deductive tool. Preference is a great one too. Many brands aren't the leader, but they might be pilot preferred. So that's great. Choosy mothers choose Jif. That's preference. So it just, for within the group, what we're trying to do when we do an appreciative discovery with top leadership and decision makers on marketing and on positioning, which has to affect the whole organization, is we really want buy-in from that leadership group. They really have to come together on the decision because they're going to have to own it. It's not something you just decide in a meeting and walk away from. And it starts that ownership process because they're participating in choosing which of these 11 they feel most fit after listening to each other and hearing from each other and sharing all the knowledge, collective knowledge that they have.
Is it's not an exclusive list, meaning we've seen brands like Heinz Ketchup, they're the leader, but they also own the attribute of slow.
Right,
So, or thick, depending on how you want to apply that.
right,
But the commercials were all about that. They didn't need to advertise, hey, we're the leader, but they
right.
advertised an attribute of what they have. So I think it's always neat to see people's minds. You can almost see the smoke coming out their ears as after they've been educated on positioning. And we talk a lot about their company, to be sitting there looking at this list that you showed and to literally be crossing off things. Nope, we're not that. We're not that. Oh, we could be this. That's
Yep.
pretty cool. Yeah,
Some become pretty obvious. They fall out pretty quickly. And
yeah.
usually we're left with um, three or four candidate ideas, and then we can vet further and get to the one that's the most powerful. That's what we're looking for, is what idea
Mhm.
is the most pervasive and powerful for the company, and what can they commit to with everything, their money, their dollars, their time, their energy, their feelings, the experience they deliver.
Yeah, explain something there, Lorraine. I'll throw it up on the screen here, which is the R&D that we
Hmm.
like to always talk about, and how those ideas can be mapped, the
Hmm.
positioning map, and what we're really shooting for. So maybe talk a little bit about that. I'll throw this up on the screen.
Yeah. One of the tests of a strong idea comes down to two of the filters uh, that are most important. The customer filter, which is we represent by the R, that's relevance to the distinctive audience or the target segment that you think cares a lot about what you're doing and how you do it. So that's the R, right? Relevance always has to come before differentiation because your idea has to be important to somebody and in enough market size, total customer market, to deliver profit to the organization. I mean, some people have said that the purpose of a business, Drucker said, is to produce a customer. That requires relevance. Others have said the purpose of a business is to deliver a profit. Well, if you're not profitable, then good luck. So
Mhm.
I would say both of them, they're not mutually exclusive. So that's the R, relevance. How meaningful is this idea to a target audience? And audiences value different things. So, it might be extremely valuable. Someone who wants a sports car and wants to look super successful in that car and young is not going to be the same person who wants to buy a safe car for the family because they're concerned about the well-being of their children and what have you. So that's where that comes in. And then differentiation is how does it maximize the separation between your product and service and competitors. The more maximization, the further the gap, the better. One of the things we did, Mark, is we did create a positioning gap research
Hmm.
uh, uh, methodology, quantitative, to kind of test the relevance of different ideas with target segments, see what idea floated their boat the most, what values, or particularly this was useful with attribute testing, and then said, well, who else do you know is delivering this? And if
Mhm.
so, how well are they delivering it? And so we were able, through that research, to pinpoint for a couple of our clients who were willing to go that far, here's where we need to be on the R&D scale.
That's some great background, and I think it's necessary to get into this topic and ways to differentiate. Otherwise, I think our listeners wouldn't understand the episodes where we touch on these different ways. So
Hmm.
let's get to it. Let's
Yeah,
start with
yeah.
one of my favorite ways to differentiate a product, service, company, or individual, or experience, as you've added, and that's owning an attribute. And the
Hmm.
reason I think it's so fun for me is that it's somewhat of a mystery, one, to figure out that attribute and then also how to express it. And, um, you know, expressing it in just the right way that touches the emotion is always
Hmm.
such a challenge because you mentioned reliability for the switch company that we
Hmm.
used before, and we used it as rugged reliability because it was in a rugged atmosphere or environment. And so just that nuance of taking reliability and adding rugged to it was is just such a fun development. You see the creative unfold, and I want to read for our listeners how we describe owning an attribute in our sheet that you held up earlier. Um,
Okay.
and it starts with the rules of play. So this is
Hmm.
an attribute ownership is probably the number one way to differentiate a product. The definition is an attribute is a characteristic or distinctive feature of a person or a thing. Persons or things are a mixture of attributes. Some attributes are more desirable or important than others. What makes a product or person unique is being known for one of these attributes. You can't own the same attribute or position that your competitor owns. You must seek another attribute to own. Too often, a company tries to emulate the leader. It's much better to search for an opposite attribute that will allow you to play off against the leader. The most effective attributes are simple and benefit oriented, such as fights cavities or kills germs. It is much better to be narrow and specific. Specifics sell, generalities do not. The drink of a new generation is much better than the homogenized joy of cola. There is also a halo effect. If you establish one benefit, the prospect is likely to give you a lot of other benefits. For example, a safer car implies better engineering. Lorraine, this is our textbook explanation.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
share with us with your broader perspective and experience on what it means to own an attribute.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is to own that characteristic or specific characteristic that separates you and speaks very clearly to a target segment who cares a lot about that. Um, I remember Alan Bradley used to go against other engineering firms who were state of the art, new generation type things by saying state of the art is not always the most reliable. So that was the reliability attribute, right? And when you are engineering something of massive infrastructure cost or what have you, you want it to work. Whether it's the
Mhm.
newest or latest or greatest is becomes less important than, um, is this thing going to work? Is it going to deliver on the value and the cost of this experience? So, as I said, it could be sexy. It could be ACE is the helpful hardware place, right? So helpful is an attribute that,
Hmm.
and that's good for Ace because they can't outlow Lowe's, they can't out Home Depot, but they can be the best little corner hardware store in every neighborhood in America by being the helpful place.
Hmm.
So that would be if we were working with them, that we would basically say that's a great position. How do we now dramatize it, as you called that before, the creative? How do we express it in the most meaningful and engaging way possible?
Hmm.
So I hope
Well,
that helps.
let's do a quick word association to
Hmm.
help our listeners understand how owning an attribute works, because
Yeah.
I think illustration is the best form of education.
Hmm.
So let's start with cars. I'm going to say
Okay.
a attribute and you name the brand. Okay.
Hmm.
So number one, car category, ultimate drivability car.
BMW, ultimate driving machine.
Yep.
Hmm.
Reliable car,
Uh, Toyota,
affordable luxury car,
Lexus,
safe car.
Volvo. Although they've let that connection, that equivalence between the attribute and their brand name weaken
Mhm.
by abandoning consistent marketing around that idea.
Yeah.
So other Kia, for example, has come on strong, and Subaru. Yeah, they've all come on strong on
Yeah.
the safety front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And if you look at all of these attributes, ultimate drivability, reliable, affordable luxury, safe, you can see
Hmm.
how those are differentiating. There's a big enough niche or buying customer that is attracted to that particular attribute. Ultimate driving machine, as you say, that might be the young hipster that wants to show he's, cool and he's up and coming. Whereas reliable is going to be the family car.
Right.
My whole family, all we have are Toyotas because they've proven to be so reliable over the years. So that's just one of those things that, from the standpoint of an attribute, it's easy to see in this category how these particular brands have separated themselves. Let's go next to the toothpaste aisle. Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
read some attributes again to
And
you.
for our viewers and listeners,
Hmm.
this is all this is not planned. You're saying something, and I have to think, immediately what the connection is, and that means that the brand has done a good job. So if I
Yeah,
miscue on one, it may be that brand needs to go back to the drawing board and,
yeah,
or actually, as our old media buyer used to say many years ago, we need to advertise these guys. They maybe need to
yeah.
go back and advertise a little more. Yeah.
Well, a good
So go ahead.
example of that is we'll do that since you just mentioned. If I said overnight delivery, you and I would probably answer FedEx because we remember those commercials.
Hmm.
But if you ask any young person today, the answer we're getting the most is Amazon. And they're
Yeah.
not, we don't think of them being in the delivery business, but that's how far that FedEx has allowed that position to be lost, I think, really. We remember the commercials with the fast talking salesman. So it's
Yeah.
it's uh it's a little dependent on what generation you're into.
No, and I said, and how those businesses have then m- moved from a single focus, rather singular, to a foci, uh, and the mind has allowed them to go there. I still think of FedEx as rapid delivery,
Hmm.
you
Yep.
know, but do they own that alone, along with UPS
Obviously
and
not.
Amazon? No,
Not
it's
if young
becoming
people aren't
kind
nailing
of
it.
what we call group brand preference.
Hmm.
And so if I were working with FedEx, I would see how we could further differentiate, maybe by using some of these tools that I talked about, how to differentiate a commodity,
Hmm.
right? Like using
Yep.
a personification, a character, or creating a new category or something like that.
Very good. Well, let's go to the toothpaste aisle next.
Hmm.
So here's some
Okay.
attributes:
Yeah,
organic or natural toothpaste.
that's that Tom's of Maine, I think,
Yes.
and it tastes terrible. Have you ever had that toothpaste?
Yeah, and I will never have it again. But there's
But
a
it is
big enough group
organic.
out there
That
that
want it.
keeps them in business.
Well,
So,
I think it's like Listerine. People think medicine breath, it's working. If it tastes
yeah.
that bad, it must be good for me. I don't know. It's like,
Well, there's the anti-fluoride, anti-chlorine, anti a lot of chemical stuff. So
yeah,
some people are willing to put up with bad taste for the benefit of
that's what I'm
having the
saying.
organic. So that's why
And they
they own
actually they
that
actually
position.
think that might be a support to the organic, that it
Hmm.
doesn't taste great, that it
Yeah,
doesn't taste like it's almost kind of a little bit of like I give myself some cred for using this, for being a good organic person.
yeah, yep.
I'm suffering a little bit.
Well, this next one's a softball because the name
Mm.
implies what it is. Sensitive teeth toothpaste.
Oh, Sensodyne, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I hate to admit that we have some of that.
Fresh breath toothpaste.
I'd say Aquafresh first because fresh is in the name, so good association. I also, and I don't know if anybody younger would remember this, but Close Up
Mhm.
would
Yeah, I
run a
think that was
second.
the kissing toothpaste we used to call it.
Yeah, yeah. When it's close, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
yeah. What the heck happened to
uh,
them? I don't see them advertising anymore.
they're still around, but
Hmm.
there's so many toothpastes in the toothpaste aisle. I don't think they've done a good
Oh,
job.
yeah.
So now this one's harder, but I think we
Hmm.
do have a name we can associate with it, and that's whitening toothpaste.
Oh, I don't think it's harder. I think that's Crest. I think
Okay.
I think Crest. When I was a kid, in kindergarten, we kids took a poll, and the world was split between Colgate and Crest, and then Crest won as the time went on because they promoted fights cavities. That was their thing. The
Hmm.
attribute that they owned was fights cavities. But over the years, I mean, that was a time when people didn't go to the dentist very often. It was post World War II, kind of baby boomer generations. People just didn't go to doctors and dentists. There wasn't fluoride everywhere in the water. And then, as I think, as I've gone through my life, fluoride is cavities have become less of a problem, and what really seems to be the concern with people is gum health, overall oral health, and certainly the the beauty, the whitening
The
teeth,
whiteness. Yeah.
having whiter teeth, which is kind of a hygienic thing and
Hmm.
a beauty thing, like kind of stroking your hair. So um, Crest has done what Lysol did, which they could because they were the leader in toothpaste with the fights category start, and they expanded out. So they're now a mega brand.
Hmm.
And when I think of Crest today, I think they own everything related to oral care, everything that could be possible for oral care. They have the whole shelf, and pretty
Hmm.
smart move for them as a
Good. Well,
leader.
let's go with one more, but I'm going to list the
Hmm.
brand first, and you give me the idea, the positioning
Oh, okay.
idea. Okay, you ready?
Okay. Yep.
New Balance. We're in the shoe category now. New Balance.
Runners. Preference by runners.
Okay.
Preferred shoe of runners. Hmm.
Okay. Converse.
In my day, that was the only sneaker. Today, I think they're repositioning as kind of a rebel shoe.
Hmm. Yeah, and they're owned by Nike, by the way.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Skechers.
Old people's uh, stylish shoes.
I don't think that's an attribute you want
No,
to.
no, they're comfortable,
Yeah,
good for your feet, kind of casual sneakers.
yeah. And then
Comfort.
Nike, they're the leader, but what attribute?
It's definitely the performance shoe.
Yeah,
It's for,
yeah,
yeah, athletes, weekend athletes who want to play like Michael Jordan. Well, he's retired now, but
yeah,
pick a new athlete. You want to play
yeah.
basketball like LeBron. He's not even young.
Well, I think our listeners can see with just these three categories, we can see how much you can differentiate by owning an attribute. Um, we say owning an attribute is probably the number one way to differentiate a product, and I think it's one of the easiest as well. What's in play here that makes this an obvious move for brand differentiation?
Well, depending on the product or category, there's different audiences. Again, it really plays to segmentation. Different audiences have different demands, even business to business. They might prefer long lasting um, to safe a safety message or to a cost, low cost message. So it allows you to segment the market, and then you increase the rapport. Which, by the way, the word rapport comes from the Greek word to close the distance.
Hmm.
So you increase rapport or relevance, RR again, with that core audience, which gives you a lot of authenticity with that core customer. And that creates, um, kind of missionaries for the brand within the customer segment, because
Hmm.
people who really feel that you've closed that distance tend to tell others about this product who care a lot about the same things. So it is, as you said, the number one way. It's not necessarily the best way to
Right.
differentiate. That's different. Leadership is the best way to differentiate. And as we said, you either are the leader, you've achieved that in some way, either through sales leadership or performance or technology, having more first than anybody else, or best, you created a new category that you created your own sandbox and you own it. So that's always the first thing that we kind of look for. How can we create a new category and be a leader if we're not a leader in those other three ways? If we are a leader in those other three ways, how do we say it as so that people feel like they've heard it for the first time and they
Hmm.
never forget it? So now it's about the communication value of how we creatively dramatize that position. Because the best thing you can do for your competitors, if you are a leader in any of these ways, is to not claim it.
Hmm.
Like, and sometimes we've had clients who, like, in this kind of false humility, well, we don't really like to bang our chest. Well, you're not banging your chest. You're stating a truth that your customers value. They
Hmm.
want the assurance. People are insecure. They want the security they're buying the leader, and it's going to deliver something unique of value to them that buying the substitute is not, right? And again, it gives you that contrast of it's either the leader or it's a substitute. And, we know what that word means.
Yeah.
So anyway, it is number one because often, particularly for highly competitive markets, there are a number of different attributes you can pick up that might be important that you can own because no one's talking about that one thing with the singularity that you're going to talk about. They just like other agencies. Somebody asked us, I think, in one of our podcasts about why we're the positioning experts. It's not like we're the only agency that talks about positioning, but it's dominant for us.
Hmm.
It is the thing. It is the one thing. Where with other agencies, if you ask them, hey, what do you think about brand positioning? Oh, yeah, we think it's important. It's way down. And they'll tell you, yeah, we do it if asked, right? So this is some of this has to do with the dominance of where you put the focus.
Well, that we just had an example of that yesterday. A client, new client, 3 months in, emailed us and gave us just a glowing review on how the position that we came up for them is transforming their business. It's making a huge difference already. He used the word reputation is growing. He indicated all the KPIs that they want are growing. Business couldn't be better. And so we've seen that happen before. We had a client that their sales force was in the appreciative discovery, and I think within a day they went out, made a sales call, and closed a huge deal because they implemented the new position on the fly in their sales meeting. So it does make a
Hmm.
difference. These ways to differentiate are key. This one about owning an attribute, again, one of my favorites because I just like to see the creative that comes out of it. But Lorraine, great advice today. I think we need to bring today's episode to a close. Hopefully, our discussion will help our listeners understand better why owning an attribute can be a powerful differentiation strategy. So, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode when we, as always, will do a deep dive on some of the core concepts of positioning. Until then,
One day
have an
you'll see
amazing day.
Nobody's business but my own.